You know, I didn't think another 2024 horror movie would even come close to competing with I Saw the TV Glow for top spot this year in my heart. But damn, The Substance really puts its best foot forward and fights for that title. I'm Real Slim Katie. Let's talk about it. I really enjoyed this film. I kind of had a mind fuck afternoon because I watched this movie, came out very numb, and then immediately watched The Wild Robot. Shout out, go watch my review on Wild Robot if you haven't already. But absolutely bazonkers mindfuck of a movie. Body horror isn't normally a genre that I love or watch for exclusively. The last true body horror film I saw in theaters was Crimes of the Future by David Cronenberg, who is an absolute master, but I fucking hated that movie. I could not get through it. I tried to see it twice. I fell asleep the entire time the first time. It was the longest movie I've ever seen in my life. And the second time, I just didn't enjoy it. But this movie takes elements of body horror that actually work for me. If you know me or you've seen a lot of reviews, I have a really hard time finding horror movies disturbing. But this movie made me absolutely squirm in my seat. I was like wincing. I almost covered my eyes several times during this movie, which is bazonkers to me. The feelings this movie evokes were visceral, even from the very first scene of watching Dennis Quaid eat shrimp in the most vile, disgusting way possible. I was disgusted. I was already like, I'm gonna fucking hate this shit. I can't do it. But this movie is crazy. We start out with Elizabeth Sparkles, an old, washed up movie star who now does an aerobics show, and we see her have like potentially the worst birthday of all time. Everybody treats her with disregard. Nobody really gives a shit. Everybody's being fake nice to her. She's essentially let go of her job. She's hit by a car watching a billboard of her face being ripped apart. Like, absolutely, probably the worst birthday of all time. And then she gets a flyer from a doctor who treated her after the car crash, recruiting her for the substance, a drug that is used to split your body into two halves. In order to understand why somebody would ever take the substance, it is very helpful to have a background of knowing what it's like to be perceived as a woman in this world today. It's super devastating to watch this movie because on one hand, I'm like, that's so risky, that's so crazy. But on the other hand, you see the way that she's being treated by people just because she's a woman that has reached the age of fertility. And that's the scariest part of this movie is how society treats women who are no longer regarded generally as sexual objects to men. That's the scariest part of this film because that's the real thing. That's the real horror. And what she's willing to do to remain sexually attractive to men, to remain physically attractive in society, because people treat her like shit otherwise. And this is a woman who is still, by all accounts, very conventionally attractive and beautiful. She's got a lot of pretty privilege, white privilege, and yet as soon as she is no longer sexually attractive to men, she's no longer of use to them. That's disgusting. But that's also the sad reality of living a feminine life in this day and age, which is the scariest part of this movie. I think a lot of what this movie makes me think about is like she's trying to separate these parts of herself, and then she begins resenting that the version of her that's living such a good life is the more conventionally attractive, younger, smoother skin, and now seeing that I'm nothing. Society disregards me. They won't even look at me, and hating that part of yourself, hating that reality, but also in the same moment, loving the life she lives with this kind of privilege of beauty and the things she's afforded and what is happening to her in that moment. It's also interesting to see how her life gets progressively worse the more that she tries to conform to what society wants her to be. No matter all the good things that happened to her, she was never good enough for herself or the people around her. And it's this game of keeping up with, well, if I'm trying to conform to what everybody else wants me to be, I will never be happy. And I can never achieve that. You can never achieve that vision. So she ends up essentially killing herself, literally draining her entire life force, physically and metaphorically, trying to become this thing that everybody wants from her, which is devastating. It's so sad. It's like actually so sad. And I feel like, yes, this movie is super scary, but it also made me really sad. Genuinely, truly, really sad. Like she was giving everything of herself to try to be loved, and it was never enough. And the harder she tried, the less society wanted the real her. That's just sad. There were some shots in this movie that were absolutely insane. I mean, the original moment where Elizabeth splits up into Sue and she like comes out of her spine and she has to sew up her spine. I mean, that was super gross. I loved that scene. And then every scene where they switch back and forth and seeing the hell that Elizabeth wrecked on the apartment to try to make things worse for Sue, in like a fit of jealousy and rage. And then every time Elizabeth wakes up, seeing how her body has deteriorated because of all of the life she's giving to this younger self that she can't live. And it's a really great idea, right? But the way that she's perceived it is that these are two different people now. So she's essentially giving all of this and she doesn't get to see or live in her mind any of the actual outcome. That's hard. It's a hard watch of a movie. Every scene that Dennis Quaid is in, I want to vomit because he's disgusting. Horrible. And I mean, they really hammer it in that like the villain of the story is men. And the villain of the story is trying to conform to what society wants you to be. She literally kills herself trying to do so. And at the end, when they like become the monstrous Elizabeth Sue or Susabelth or whatever they called it in the title card, genuinely, first of all, amazing prosthetic and makeup work. I hope they get massive award season cred for that. And everything they did to physically alter both of them was brilliant. Truly brilliant, because I know so much of that was done practically, or at least using prosthetics and then some kind of digital alteration, I presume. Looked brilliant, looked amazing, looked visceral. So the amazing visuals led to some like disgusting gore shots. Finally, at the end during the New Year's Eve, when her body produces a tit. Or when, oh my goodness, and this might be the most horrific or like uncomfortable I was during the whole movie, when Sue is trying to film an episode of Pump It Up and like a bubble comes out of her ass and everybody's staring. Literally everybody gathers around to watch her body. Horrific. And then she pulls it out and it's a chicken. Ugh. Ugh. I hated that. It was vile. It was disgusting. And that's why I think this was such an effective horror movie. Literally made me squeamish. Literally made me feel ill. She was trapped in the prison of her own mind. She could have had an amazing life. Truly. It's super sad, and I can't pretend to know what it would be like to be really famous and really adored by many, many people and then to lose value with age. I can't imagine what that would be like, and that sounds horrible. But it's also super sad to see that like she had a life, she had potential, like there's so much she could have done, but she gave everything for the chance to be beautiful. It's just so sad. It's just so sad. Now, also, Fred, I think the name of the guy who like flirted with her was like, oh, you're from homeroom. I didn't think that they actually knew each other. I thought he was just saying that. I thought what was going to happen in the film is that they were going to meet up and they both lied because neither of them knew each other, but they were just trying to like feel better about each other. But the worst part of this movie, and this whole scene was an allegory, right? She doesn't show up for this date. The whole thing is a crazy act of self-sabotage that she feels rightfully forced into, and it's just devastating and it's heartbreaking. Hate to see it. And you want to know the most horrifying or disturbing part of this movie is that the lock in the bathroom, the hardware was they used torque screws. I have nothing wrong with torque screws, but I literally thought about it for like maybe 15 minutes during the movie when I saw it. Disturbing. Anyways, definitely go check out The Substance. I wouldn't recommend taking it, but I would recommend watching the film. Demi Moore absolutely smashed it out of the park, and it made me squeam. Squeam? I was trying to say squirm and scream at the same time, and I said squeam. So if you want to squeam, go watch The Substance. Anyways, see ya.